Now imagine this. What if Columbus never set sail? What if history took a step sideways and someone else discovered America? Then everything, from the language you're hearing this in to the world we live in, would be utterly different. But before we talk about who discovered America, let's ask an honest question. Did it need discovering? Long before any Europeans, people already lived here. Millions of people. They arrived tens of thousands of years ago, when a land bridge stood where the Bering Strait is now, Beringia, the vanished isthmus between Asia and America. They spread from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego, building hundreds of cultures, languages, and states. In the north of the continent, the Algonquian peoples, hunters, fishers, masters of birch bark craft. Their homelands stretched from the Atlantic to the Great Lakes. They knew every river, every trail, living in rhythm with forests and seasons. In the center, the Iroquois built longhouses and united nations into confederacies, one of the first democracies of the Americas, where a council of elders made decisions. Farther south, in Mesoamerica, in what is now Mexico and Central America, the Maya built city observatories, created a highly precise calendar and a mathematics with zero, long before such things appeared in Europe. In the Andes, the ancestors of the Inca carved terraces into mountains, strung suspension bridges over abysses, and laid roads along which runners carried messages for hundreds of miles. These were not savages waiting for civilization. These were civilizations, with their own science, architecture, trade, and law. They simply lacked gunpowder and iron, but they had the wisdom to live on this land for millennia without exhausting it. So when the first Europeans reached these shores, they did not find emptiness. They found the land's rightful hosts. Now, let's move to the early 11th century, nearly 5 centuries before Columbus, north, where people had lived beside the sea for ages, drawing food and pathways to new lands from it. Meet the Vikings. They lived in what is now Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. They were Europe's first true blue water sailors, tough, stubborn, at home with storms and danger. Their ships, long ships, drakers, with carved dragon heads at the prow, could cross thousands of kilometers of open ocean, skim along waves, and enter even shallow rivers. There's a myth that Vikings were nothing but raiders. That isn't true. They were traders, explorers, and the first Europeans to dare venture beyond the known world. First, they reached Iceland, then Greenland, and then one more step west. In the late 10th century, Leif Erikson, son of the legendary Eric the Red, came to a mysterious land of forests and wild grapes. He called it Vinland, the land of wine. This was 500 years before Columbus. They were the first Europeans to set foot on American soil, but history almost forgot their names. Archaeologists found traces of their settlement in the north of Newfoundland, a place called L'Anse aux Meadows, precise dating by tree rings, and evidence of a solar storm, the year 1021. In the Norse sagas, the locals are called Skraelings, the Vikings' name for the indigenous peoples of those lands. At first, there was trade, furs and walrus ivory, in exchange for metal tools and red cloth. Then came conflict, perhaps from misunderstanding, perhaps because the Vikings tried to hold ground by force, perhaps because the indigenous peoples defended their land from strangers behaving like conquerors. The sagas tell of skirmishes and raids. There were too few Vikings, and too many locals who knew every trail and ambush. The settlement lay too far from Greenland. The climate was harsh, the route home deadly, and waging war on those who had lived there for millennia made no sense. The Vikings went home. Vinland remained a legend in the sagas. But let's imagine it went differently. From here on, this isn't history, it's our what if. Pure speculation. Suppose that in that first contact, both sides chose curiosity over fear. A Viking blacksmith shows how to work iron. A local hunter teaches how to read tracks in the snow. A Viking navigator shares star charts. A local fisher shows where the salmon run. Children play together. Elders agree on hunting and fishing grounds. Families intermarry. Harvest festivals are celebrated together. The Vikings learned to survive in these forests, where winter is longer and harsher than in Scandinavia. The indigenous peoples gained metal, iron axes, knives, needles, tools that ease labor and crafts. But most importantly, they learned to live on one land without trying to erase each other. This friendship changes everything. Decades pass. Settlements grow into towns. On the site of future New York rises Jotungard, the city of giants, ringed by fjords and stone towers. Along the coast appear trading harbors, forges, and shipyards. Thus is born the North Atlantic League, the first self-governing cities of the Americas. Homes speak two tongues, Old Norse and Algonquian languages. Scandinavian runes stand beside patterns of wampum, shell belts that seal agreements. Longships are built alongside birch bark canoes. In the evenings, houses echo with both sagas and tales of the forest spirits. Here, people prize work, keeping one's word, and mastery of craft. Houses are wooden, their roofs carved with dragons. Laws are cut into runestones on the square, a code of honor instead of a written constitution. Society rallies under the banners of clans rather than state flags. Strength and nature stay in balance. Word of this allied land reaches Europe. New ships sail not as refugees, but as envoys of a new world. New families arrive, not as conquerors, but settlers, ready to learn the rules of this land. By 1492, when Columbus finally sets out, America meets him not as an unknown wilderness, but as a continent with an established order. Trading factories, merchant depots, and outposts line the coast. Mixed cities where both Vikings and indigenous elders share in decisions. A fleet that knows the Atlantic better than the Spaniards do. The Spaniards see not defenseless villages, but fortified ports under banners of the wolf and the eagle. With history turned this way, the Conquista, those campaigns of conquest that seized new lands for gold and faith and chained people into slavery, might never start. Instead, an age of trade could begin, people negotiating rather than warring. An era of northern renaissance, an exchange of knowledge between continents. Europe adopts Viking shipbuilding and navigation, while America absorbs the Old World's writing, philosophy, and mechanics. Today, the world would look different. American cities would be built of stone and timber, their skyscrapers dressed in carved ornament. The flag would bear the emblems of the wolf and the hammer. The currency would be not the dollar, but the silver rune. And perhaps humanity would step into space not under the banner of freedom, but under the word honor. But history chose another path. The Vikings returned home, and their trace on American soil vanished under snow and time. As their ships rounded Greenland, another empire was already rising on the far side of the world, an empire whose gold was the purest, and whose rulers dreamed the boldest dreams. Along the great Niger River, the third longest river in Africa, stretched the mighty Mali Empire. It was one of the wealthiest states of the Middle Ages. Science, architecture, and astronomy flourished here. Timbuktu was a center of Islamic learning, a city of libraries that housed thousands of manuscripts. And Mali's gold was considered the purest in the world, a currency coveted across Europe. Among the rulers of this empire lived a man named Abu Bakari II, a Mansa, a king of Mali. He longed to learn what lay beyond the vast ocean, past the line of the horizon where the sun seems to set. According to a legend recorded by the Arab scholar Al-Umari, he is said to have built a massive fleet, some say 2,000 ships, and sent them west to find the other side of the world. The first expedition vanished in the ocean. Then Abu Bakari himself led a second, and he was never seen again. Historians still argue, was it true or a beautiful myth? No archaeological finds have been uncovered. No traces of African ships on the shores of America. But let's imagine the legend was true. What if those ships didn't disappear, but actually reached the shores of the New World? Currents and trade winds could have carried them to the Caribbean islands, and from there to the warm shores of the southeast coast, modern-day Florida and the Carolinas. Then the first to step onto American soil after the Vikings would have been Africans, bearers of writing, music, metallurgy, and skilled crafts. Picture the moment. Dawn, a quiet cove. Out of the morning mist emerge the silhouettes of ships, unlike anything seen here before. On the shore stands a group of local inhabitants. They watch from afar, hidden in the shade of the trees. The Africans disembark carefully. They do not rush inland or raise their weapons. Instead, they set up a temporary camp by the water, light a fire, and cook food. Days pass. One of the elders decides to make first contact. He approaches slowly, unarmed. He raises a hand, a gesture of peace. The African captain answers in kind. They do not understand each other's speech, but there is a language of gestures. There are smiles. There is a shared curiosity. The next day, more people come. The Africans display an iron knife, easily slicing through a thick vine. The locals are impressed. Using stone tools themselves, they cannot achieve such sharpness. In return, they show how to find fresh water in the jungle, how to twist ropes from vines, which plants are edible and which are poisonous. For the Africans, who have spent months on the ocean, this is more than knowledge. It is survival. Weeks go by. The camp by the shore grows. The Africans build the first huts, not makeshift shelters, but sturdy houses. It is a signal. We are staying, but not to seize, rather, to build alongside you. The local elders convene a council. One question: what should be done with the newcomers? Some argue for expulsion. They are strangers, unknown. Some argue for watchfulness. If they do not disturb us, let them live. But there is a third view. They have metal, textiles, knowledge. Perhaps this is an opportunity. The council decides, permit trade, but under supervision. Do not let them inland, only the coast. Thus the exchange begins. The Africans share iron tools, knives, axes, needles. Textiles, bright, durable, unfamiliar to the locals. Bronze ornaments, bracelets, rings. Knowledge of metalworking, how to smelt, how to forge. The local peoples offer knowledge of the land, which fruits, roots, and herbs. Guides, safe trails and sources of water. Provisions, maize, beans, sweet potatoes, crops previously unknown to the Africans. Alliance, protection from hostile tribes deeper inland. It is not friendship at first sight. It is mutual self-interest, but a calculation that works. The Africans gain a base, food and safety. The local tribes gain technologies that offer an edge over neighbors. Gradually, calculation grows into something more. The first mixed families are born. Children teach one another their languages. Elders tell their legends, African and local. Decades pass, contacts deepen. Along the coast arise mixed settlements, trading posts where African merchants live beside local families. Iron and bronze would accelerate agriculture. Maize, laums, and sweet potatoes would travel back to Africa. River routes emerge. The Atlantic becomes a road, not a wall. Thus a new civilization would be born, Golden America. Cities of red stone and copper, squares with drum towers and statues of the sun. A written script blending Mandinka, the language of Mali's people, with local tongues. Trade is secured by treaties, shared markets, common rules of exchange, signs of hospitality. A growing network of ports binds two continents together. Centuries pass. The network of ports strengthens. From the Caribbean to Africa, the Atlantic becomes a bridge, not a barrier. When Europeans finally reach these shores, they will encounter not an unknown world, but a developed system of cities, commerce, and alliances. They will have to negotiate, not conquer. With such a turn of history, the world would have evolved differently. The Atlantic slave trade, one of the darkest chapters of real history, would not become the ocean's economic foundation. The Union of Ports bans the capture and sale of people from the outset. Europeans would move more quickly toward wage labor and technical invention instead of the exploitation of humans. Religious wars in Europe are shorter. The focus shifts to whose markets and whose discoveries. Science and medicine advance through Afro-Atlantic schools of learning, botany, herbal healing, agriculture. On the southeastern coast, on the site of modern Charleston, a city called Sankofa would rise, the largest port of the Atlantic Union. Skyscrapers adorned with Adinkra motifs, red stone and bronze details. Squares with towers for drums. The symbol of the city is Sankofa, a bird looking back in order to move forward. Schools teach the Atlantic lingua franca, a blend of English, Mandinka, and local languages. If the first to arrive had been traders and scholars, rather than conquerors, America would have grown as a synthesis of Africa and the New World. Fewer empires, more unions, less gold, more knowledge, and the world we live in today would quite literally sound different. But history took another path. Mali's expedition disappeared into the ocean, and while Africa looked west, in the east another fleet was already rising. vast, resplendent, its sails bearing the image of a dragon. Early 15th century, the Ming Dynasty. China is in a golden age. It is the most advanced civilization of its time, with gunpowder, the compass, paper, and printing. Cities of 1 million inhabitants, while Europe's largest capitals scarcely reach 100,000. Porcelain, silk, tea, goods for which Europe is willing to pay in gold. Around this time, a man named Zheng He, an admiral of the imperial fleet, a Muslim, a eunuch at court, commanded the largest naval expeditions in history, well before the European age of discovery. His fleet was not Columbus's 3 caravels. It was an armada of 300 ships. The largest, the treasure ships, were 9-masted giants over 100 meters, 330 plus feet long. There were 27,000 people on board: sailors, soldiers, interpreters, cartographers, physicians, craftsmen. From 1405 to 1433, Zheng He undertook 7 great voyages. His ships reached India, Persia, Arabia, and the east coast of Africa. But these were not wars of conquest. China displayed its greatness through diplomacy and trade. Zheng He brought gifts, established commercial ties, mapped the coasts, and gathered knowledge about the world. After the 7th voyage, everything ended abruptly. The new emperor considered the naval expeditions too costly. The threat from the north, the Mongols, seemed more urgent than distant lands. Confucian officials argued, "The Middle Kingdom is the center of the world. Why do we need barbarians across the ocean?" An edict was issued. No more expeditions. Shipyards were closed. Maps and records were sealed in the archives. The great fleet was disbanded. China turned its back on the ocean. But let us imagine history going differently. Imagine, the emperor does not cancel the program. On the contrary, he orders them to go farther. If there are lands beyond Africa, find them. In 1434, Zheng He prepares an 8th voyage. The plan is ambitious: to round Africa, using monsoons and currents, and enter the unknown Western Ocean. The goal: find a new route to the lands of the setting sun. After months at sea, land, shores covered with unfamiliar forests. Perhaps this is the coast of modern Central America, the territory of the Maya, the only civilization in the Americas with a developed writing system and astronomy. The Chinese act according to a protocol honed over 7 expeditions. They have experience contacting dozens of peoples, from African sultanates to Indian principalities. They know every encounter is unique, but diplomacy works everywhere. First, observation from afar. Chinese scouts study the terrain and the inhabitants' behavior. They see stone buildings, organized fields, canals. These are not wild tribes. This is a civilization. Zheng He adjusts his approach, not as with island peoples, but as with a developed state. The first meeting is theater, diplomacy staged as spectacle. The Chinese land with full ceremony, dragon banners, musicians, officials in court dress. But weapons are concealed. This is a visit, not an invasion. The Maya respond with their own ritual: priests in jaguar masks, warriors with obsidian spears. Both sides display strength, but keep their distance. The breakthrough comes unexpectedly. A Chinese astronomer reveals a star chart. A Maya priest recognizes the constellations. They, too, have watched the heavens for centuries. Mathematics becomes the first common language. The Chinese write numbers. The Maya answer with their own system, featuring 0, which Europe does not yet know. Knowledge follows numbers. The Chinese demonstrate the compass. The needle always points north. The Maya present rubber, a material that repels water. The Chinese unfurl a map of the known world. The Maya respond with their maps of Central America. Both civilizations understand. They face equals, simply different. Zheng He offers what has worked everywhere: a tributary system, not conquest, not subjugation, formal recognition. Local rulers remain in power, but receive a Chinese seal and title. In return, a symbolic tribute every few years, and the right to trade with the empire. The Maya agree, but on their terms. Their city-states remain independent. The Chinese may build trading compounds in the ports, but may not own land inside the country. Intermarriage is permitted, but children belong to the mother's culture. Over decades of presence, the Chinese bring not swords, but a civil service. Sounds dull, Yet this is what changes the continent. There appear censuses, who lives where, doing what, land cadasters, who owns what, recorded and sealed, standard measures, a pound weighs the same everywhere, a postal service, reliable long-distance communication, examinations for officials, authority not only by birth. The local nobility resists at first, but merchants quickly grasp the benefits: uniform rules, easier trade, records of debts, protection against fraud, post, communication with distant partners. 1492, Columbus reaches the Caribbean islands, but instead of unknown lands, he encounters bureaucracy. Columbus is stunned. He expected a route to India, or at least wild territories for the crown. He finds an organized system instead, where every island knows of his arrival a day after he lands. The Spaniards try to bargain, to threaten. The reply is cool and formal. The rules are the same for everyone. Disagree, and you will be denied provisions in every port of the network. Attempt a seizure by force. Signal fires have already warned the neighboring islands. Under such a turn of history, there would have been no demographic catastrophe among indigenous peoples. The Chinese model emphasizes assimilation over annihilation. Local elites are incorporated into the system. Common people remain on their land. Total cultural erasure. The Chinese record local languages, study traditions, and preserve knowledge. For the empire, diversity is a form of wealth. Gold rush. Gold and silver would flow in smaller, regulated amounts through Chinese customs. Inflation in Europe would be milder, development slower, but steadier. On the western coast, where San Francisco stands today, there would be a city called Dajinshan, Great Golden Mountain, but not a gold rush town, an administrative capital of the Eastern Ocean. Buildings are laid out to a strict plan, broad avenues running north to south, lanes east to west. At the center is not a business district, but the Imperial Academy of the New World, where candidates sit for the civil service examinations required to govern. In the courts sit not lay juries, but professional judges who have passed examinations in law. Crimes are entered into a single registry. Steal in one city, and the others will know. Schools teach not only local history, but also the Chinese classics. Every educated person can quote Confucius, but also knows Maya legends and Apache songs. Instead of a cult of individual success, the ideal of service to the state. Wealth is respected, but true prestige is a high post in the examination-based civil service. But none of this happened. After Zheng He's 7th voyage, China shut its sea gates. The greatest fleet in history rotted in port. The maps of the voyages disappeared into the imperial archives. China turned inward, built walls instead of ships, looked inward rather than beyond the horizon. And while the Middle Kingdom sealed itself within its own grandeur, the Americas gathered strength for their leap. What if it had not been the old world that discovered the new, but the other way around? Let's imagine the central what if. Columbus never got his ships. Isabella and Ferdinand refused him for good. The money went to the war with the Moors, and the Genoese dreamer died in obscurity, never convincing anyone to sail west. Europe was busy with its own troubles, wars of succession, religious schisms, the plague. No one looked across the ocean. Too expensive, too dangerous, too mad. Decades passed, then centuries. America remained undiscovered by Europe, but the continent did not stand still. Without the European diseases that killed 90% of the population, it was home not to millions, but to tens of millions. Without conquest and colonization, local civilizations developed on their own path. In the north, the Iroquois League, Haudenosaunee, expanded, taking in more and more nations. It was no longer a confederacy. It was a republic with elected councils and written laws. In Mesoamerica, the Maya city-states experienced a new flowering. Without the Spanish invasion, libraries endured. Thousands of codices on history, science, and philosophy. The Inca Empire in the Andes did not fall to conquistadors. On the contrary, having survived a civil war, it grew stronger and more centralized. The road network reached 40,000 kilometers, and the Shasky courier system carried messages at about 200 kilometers a day. Around 1550, a pivotal meeting occurred. Traders from the north reached the Maya cities. The Iroquois brought a new technique for working iron. They had learned to smelt it from bog ore. The Maya shared mathematics and astronomy. Knowledge spread like wildfire. Within 50 years, iron tools reached the Andes. The Incas, masters of organization, created the first manufactories. The wheel, long known but impractical in the mountains, was now used on the plains. By 1600, something appeared that had never existed before, a pan-American trade network. Caravans of goods and ideas moved from the Great Lakes to Tierra del Fuego. It was the Incas who took the decisive step. They already had a seafaring tradition. Balsa rafts with sails had plied the coast for centuries, but now, with iron tools and Maya mathematics, they built real ships. In 1620, the Inca Emperor Yupanqui dreamed of a land beyond the Eastern Sea, where the sun rises. The priests interpreted it thus: the gods command them to find the world's beginning. The emperor ordered a fleet. 5 years of preparation followed. The ships were a hybrid of Inca rafts and northern canoes, but larger, sturdier, with multiple masts. Navigation was by the stars, as the Maya taught, and by quipa, knotted cords recording currents and winds. In 1625, a flotilla of 20 ships headed into the Atlantic. On board were 3,000 people: sailors, warriors, artisans, interpreters, even several women of noble birth. This was not reconnaissance. This was an embassy. After 2 months at sea, land, the west coast of Africa, in present-day Angola. Why there? The South Equatorial Current and prevailing winds naturally carry ships from Brazil to Africa. It was 1625. Africa had known Europeans for 150 years. Portuguese forts lined the coast. The slave trade was in full swing. Local kingdoms waged war on one another for captives to sell to Europeans. Inca ships entered the mouth of the Kwanza River. Fishermen of the Mbundu people were the first to spot them. Panic. New ships, so new slavers. But something strange happened. The newcomers didn't seize people. They danced. The Incas performed the ritual greeting of the sun. Then they laid out gifts on the shore. Textiles with unheard-of patterns, gold ornaments, strange vegetables, potatoes, tomatoes, maize, and they waited. A local chief, weary of Portuguese pressure, decided to take the risk. If these were new traders, perhaps they were better than the Portuguese. He sent envoys. The language barrier was absolute, but the Incas had brought talking knots, quipu with hundreds of concepts encoded in chords and diagrams. Slowly, with gestures and drawings, contact was established. Within a week, the Portuguese heard of the strange visitors. The governor of the fort of São Paulo de Luanda was stunned. Where did these ships come from? Competitors from Spain, the Dutch, the English? He sent a detachment to investigate. The meeting of 3 civilizations took place on neutral ground. The Portuguese with muskets and armor, Africans with spears and shields, Incas with obsidian maces and golden standards. The Portuguese captain tried every language he knew, to no avail. The Inca commander showed a quipu with a map. He drew a ship, the ocean, the rising sun. Slowly, the unimaginable dawned on the Portuguese. These people had come from the west. The news spread like an explosion. Within a month, it reached Lisbon. In 3, all of Europe. Unknown lands beyond the Western Ocean, and there was gold there. The newcomers shared it freely. But Europe in 1625 was not Columbus's Europe. The 30 Years' War raged. Protestants against Catholics. Empires crumbled. There was no time for new lands. Only the trading republics, Venice, Genoa, Amsterdam, swiftly outfitted expeditions, not to conquer, to trade. By 1630, regular contact was established, but this was not colonization. It was commerce. America met Europeans as an organized power. Iron, gunpowder, horses. Yes, we'll take them. But on our terms. Trading posts were welcome. Settlements, only with local approval. Attempted seizure, war with the entire continent. In this reality, discovery ran both ways. Inca envoys arrived in Madrid and Paris. Maya scholars studied European mathematics at Oxford. Iroquois diplomats took part in the Peace of Westphalia. Europeans settled in America, but as guests, not masters. Mixed cities rose on both shores of the Atlantic. In Seville, an Inca quarter. In Cusco, an Italian one. Exchange flowed both ways. America received horses, livestock, the wheel, and alphabetic writing. Europe received potatoes, maize, cacao, and rubber. Africa, the unexpected beneficiary, became the hub of three-way trade. The slave trade never became the backbone of the economy. American states categorically forbade it. They had their own memory of freedom. In a world where America discovered Europe, the balance of power was entirely different. There was no Western dominance. Three equal centers of power: Europe, America, Asia, with Africa as the connective link. The United Nations would have appeared 300 years earlier as a council of equals, not victors of a war. World languages were not only European. Quechua, the language of the Incas, was the language of diplomacy. Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs, was the language of trade. Iroquois was the language of international law. Ecology developed differently. American reverence for nature met European science earlier. Perhaps the Industrial Revolution would have been green from the start. In the center of Washington, which would bear another name, would stand not Greek columns, but the Pyramid of the Sun and the Palace of the Council of Tribes. But none of this came to pass. Columbus did get his ships. In 1492, Europe came to America, with cross and sword, with disease and greed. 90% of the indigenous population perished. Whole civilizations vanished. Knowledge of millennia burned in the fires of the Inquisition. History knows no subjunctive mood, but knowing that it could have been otherwise matters. To remember, the world we know is not the only possible one. It is simply the one that happened. We saw four worlds that never were, four Americas that could have existed. A Viking America, where honor matters more than gold, where Europeans and indigenous peoples built cities together. An African America, where trade defeated slavery, where drums and science forged a new civilization. A Chinese America, where order and bureaucracy stopped the chaos of conquest. And an America that discovered Europe, where equality wasn't seized by force, but established from the start. All these worlds have something in common: contact, not conquest; trade, not plunder; exchange, not annihilation. And in all these worlds, the indigenous peoples of the Americas remain on their lands, keep their languages, pass down their knowledge. Are these fantasies? Yes, but fantasies grounded in real possibilities. The Vikings really were in America. A Chinese fleet really could have reached it. African ships really did sail the ocean. And the civilizations of the Americas were indeed capable of great voyages. But history chose Columbus. Why? Not because he was special. Dozens of sailors could have done the same. It was because at the end of the 15th century, all the factors aligned. Europe was desperately seeking a route to spices that bypassed the Turks. Navigation technologies had reached the necessary level. Spain had just finished the Reconquista and was looking for a new goal. And most of all, Europeans were willing to do anything for gold. Columbus became a symbol not of discovery, but of the beginning of the greatest catastrophe in human history. 56 million dead in a single century. Thousands of languages gone forever. Entire libraries of knowledge burned. This exceeds the number who died in World War II. 95% of Maya written sources destroyed. Of 1,000 plus languages in the Americas, fewer than 300 remain. But this video isn't about blaming Columbus. He died believing he had found a route to India. He didn't plan genocide. He was simply a man of his time, greedy, stubborn, willing to do anything for glory. The real question is this: why does a meeting of civilizations almost always turn into the destruction of one of them? Why does discovery mean conquest? Why does contact become conflict? Why can't the strong simply trade with the weak instead of enslaving them? We showed four alternatives for a reason. Humanity stands on the brink of new discoveries: Mars, the Moon, other planets, and perhaps a meeting with other civilizations. Will we be the new conquistadors, or will we learn from the mistakes of the past? The history of the Americas is not just about the past. It is a warning for the future, about what happens when the hunger for gold outweighs life, when us matters more than them, when power decides who deserves to exist. Columbus did not discover America. It didn't need to be discovered. Millions of people had lived there for thousands of years. Columbus began its conquest, and every time we say the discovery of America, we erase the memory of those who lived there before, of those who might be living there now. of the knowledge we lost forever. The world we live in is the result of a choice made 500 years ago. A choice for force over dialogue, gold over knowledge, conquest over cooperation. But the future is not yet written, and the next choice is ours. When we meet others, on Earth or beyond, will we remember the lessons of 1492 or repeat them? History has no subjunctive mood, but knowing it could have been otherwise matters. Because it means this: the future can be otherwise too, if, of course, we choose it to be.